How
Hey
are you doing?
everybody, we're going to give it a couple of minutes to get started, but we have a full house tonight so far, so that's great to hear.
Good, good.
And I think Jace was about to share before the recording, unless you want to save it for the recording, what a chinwag is.
I can do it either, as far as that goes. But so a chinwag is I would say it's an English term, right? Because that's the only context I've heard it specifically in. But I had a conversation several years ago with a colleague, Michelle Laverick, and the term essentially means just a kind of an informal conversation, as I understand it. And I'm sure she can correct me if I have the definition, fouled up or whatnot, but it's just kind of an informal conversation. Let's see where we go and just see what we have to talk about and just kind of let it flow and cover what we need to and not cover things we don't, whatever, that type of thing. So no real structure today. We were initially going to talk about like what's new and kind of the can deck, if you will, to a point. But I think rather than doing a deck, I think I'm just going to kind of play around in the interface and talk about some of the specific features and kind of where I see value in them, that type of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, we actually had people asking specifically, does Mike Laverick know you're still in his chinwag? And please say British, not English.
Okay, British. Excuse me. No. So yeah.
So
Well,
we,
hey,
we do have British attendees tonight.
well, so I have an Irish heritage, right? So I don't know any difference as far as that goes, right? So, but I like chinwag specifically in that it's just it's kind of informal, right? No real formality. We're all friends here. We're not here to throw FUD, and at the same time, we're just here to kind of see where it goes and try to get some value out of it, that type of thing.
Cool. Great, well said, Jace. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording now, and if you want to say all that again for the recording, I probably should have been recording it that first time because that was awesome.
You'll have to do it again.
Yeah. I'm going to start recording in 3, 2. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to vBrownBag. I'm Tom Green, and I'll be your host of 3 or 4 different hosts tonight. So we have a very exciting vSAN discussion, and we can't talk about vSAN without talking about Jase McCarty. He's technical marketing for vSAN, and he's quite a guy.
I'm honestly the dumbest guy in storage, I'll tell you that, and I claim that title.
So we'll be having a great conversation tonight. The conversation will be happening at vBrownBag on Twitter and following the hashtag vBrownBag. I'm Tom Green, and I'll be watching on Twitter. We're also joined with Kyle Ruddy and Ariel Sanchez Mora, who didn't make it onto the slide. Sorry, Ariel.
No worries. I'm the numbers one, so.
No, you guys are the rock stars here. You guys are the ones that bring a lot of value to the community. So hats off to you guys.
Ariel and I will be racing to the bottom while you're rising to the top, Jace. So I'm jumping back to that first one. So if you want to briefly talk about what a chinwag is, like we were talking before the recording started.
Okay. So I'll say that I'm stealing the term just for the purpose of tonight, right? So a chinwag, and I've since been educated that it's British, not English, right? As far as that goes, but it's a term that was used in a conversation I had with Michelle Laverick many years ago. And as I understand it, and I may be butchering the definition, but as I understand it, it's kind of an informal conversation between friends, that type of thing. Just basically where we, have a good positive conversation about whatever, right? And that's kind of what I want to do tonight when it comes to vSAN, specifically 6.6 and some of the new things that we're doing. And I don't really want to do anything from a slide perspective. I'm just going to jump in with a live demo and kind of cover some of the different things that we're doing with 6.6, and then probably at some point I'll have to go and spin up a browser. But at some point, I think I'm going to mention a little Easter egg hunt, right? So this is something that I didn't realize that I did. And it's in a video, which I'll kind of point at a little bit later, and I'll let everybody dissect that at a later time. But I think I'm probably going to, specific to this Easter egg hunt, is mention something like, if you send me the answer to where the particular Easter egg is and what it pertains to, for like the first 3 people that ping me with the correct answer of what the Easter egg is, we'll and unfortunately I have to keep it to US based because of taxes and VAT and all that type of stuff. But I'll send something nice, like a vSAN hat or some other vSAN swag specifically. So we'll get to that as we're wrapping up.
That's awesome. We appreciate that, and I'll give you my address at the. I mean, I'm sure whoever will be happy to have that. So I'm going to hand you presenter here and
All right.
let you live dangerously.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah. I had a little bit of an issue with this environment actually yesterday, as I was training some customers. So now if you take a look here, I've got a pretty healthy vSAN 6.6 cluster. I've actually got another one below this. This is actually nested with 4 hosts. I'm not presenting all of them. I've got one of William Lamb's scripts over here actually presenting some nested hosts. These first 4 are the ones that are actually loaded here, if you will. But what I really wanted to cover specific to vSAN, some of the things that we're doing, I'll really start with, and I've got a video which I'll cover, like I said, a little bit later around some of the features. But if we take a look at vSAN 6.6 specifically, we'll notice here under General, I actually just upgraded this virtual cluster earlier in the day today. I'm running, actually, let me go and show here so everybody sees the build I'm running. This is just 6.6 GA build. I'm sorry. There we go. Right. So 5310538. Right. So the 6.6 GA build is what I'm running. So nothing special, no beta code or anything like that. My on-disk format version is version 5. I will say that we did skip from 3 to 5. And all transparency, as I like to be certain to obviously show all the good and the bad, the warts, that kind of thing. We were previously 3.0, which was internally actually 4.0, and 2.0 was 2.0, and so we kind of had a little skip from what we had externally and what we have internally, and so now with everything being 5.0 with version 6.6, and everything aligns and people don't get confused, that type of thing. I don't recall whether or not I've consumed any disks in this particular cluster. I don't think I have. But I'll go over, okay, there we go. I do have some disks, right? But you should see a new feature here called Configuration Assist. We call it Config Assist, kind of short. If we'll notice, if we were to take a look at the health of this, we may see nodes aren't necessarily talking to each other, that type of thing. All right, so I'm probably going to say, well, time's not synced across. I think I've got some other networking issues specifically. No, my networking is working. Okay, so let me go back and take a look at Config Assist again. All right, so I look at my network configuration. It says, hey, look, these hosts don't have vMotion configured. Let me go ahead and create a VM kernel vMotion adapter. This works exactly the same for vSAN. I just happen to have it already set up on these guys. All right. I can now go, oh, come on. It's on this one. There we go. Different VDS. And I'm going to choose the vMotion port group. I'm not worried about jumbo frames. And I'm going to statically assign some IPs, right? And I'm just going to pick these from random somewhere. I don't know if they're good or not, but I'm probably stepping on somebody's toes, but I'm not really worried about it, for the purpose of this demo. All right, notice I just hit tab and everything gets populated. In the process of all that being populated, here within the Configuration Assist, notice I didn't have to go anywhere else. I didn't have to do anything anywhere else within the cluster, right? And that's kind of where Configuration Assist comes in. It will help us set up all of our vSAN interfaces. It probably didn't like the IPs I used, and that's fine. I can go back and fix those later. But the point I'm getting at is it really gives us the opportunity to go in and set a lot of things in a single spot, right? Notice here, generic cluster, HA and DRS enabled. HA is not, but DRS is. Rather than clicking over here and going to HA or DRS, then I can just actually click it here, right? This is one of my favorite pieces when it comes to 6.6 config assist, and the fact that I can, all from a single spot, manage just about everything, right, as far as at least initial setup goes. Now, hardware compatibility is going to fail because these are nested hosts, the one, but I'll show you something in just a moment that gets pretty exciting as far as that goes. And I can do a burn-in test here, which essentially just drops me down to do the low stress test and run it for 10 minutes. Right, so that's just some of the kind of things that you do typically when it comes to a vSAN config. Now let me back up to my actual running cluster that I've got a fair number of VMs on, or a handful rather. All right, if we notice under my, I'm not going to worry about the burn-in test for the moment, but if I look at my vSAN config, I happen to have, you know, all my networking in place. I have HA and DRS in place. I have vSAN enabled, but notice I don't have all my disks claimed. And the reason being is because hosts 5 through 8 were not part of this cluster a little bit earlier today, right? So what I can actually do right here is I can go to all disks claimed, and then notice claim disk for vSAN, and it brings up the claim disk wizard. I don't have to go anywhere else. I don't have to do anything special. All right, and I can have all the same functions, if you will, that I previously had. Not doing anything hosts 1 through 4, but hosts 5, 6, and 7, I can go and I can claim cache devices, capacity devices, right? So all in one spot. All right, I'm not going to do these guys just yet, just because it's a bit time consuming. Okay, so I'm fine with that particular error. If I look at hardware compatibility though, notice that, you know, I've got some things that I'm checking on, and I'll talk about these in just a second, but notice controller firmware is not VMware certified. Now, if you'll notice, I've got this host right here, and it doesn't want to auto-populate. I don't know why. Okay, so I've got these two hosts. Notice that host number 6 has an incorrect build, 25.4, I'll say is, you know, shorthand. And then the host number 108, I have no idea what it is, none at all. Right now, I will be honest in saying these are Dell hosts. They're Dell R630s with the H730 controller. And we do this on a couple different vendors and a couple different controllers with those vendors. Dell just happens to be one of them. Lenovo, we also do this on several configs, Fujitsu and Supermicro. I can come over here to updates and I can actually try to remediate that. But what I'll also do is I'll notice that the controller disk group mode is certified, right? So we see that in some cases, right, so the hosts that actually have disks added and have disk groups, like this one as such. All right, so host number 3, I see that it's an all-flash disk group, and this particular controller is supported for both all-flash and hybrid. Okay, I can also see that the controller driver is certified, and we can have multiple drivers that could work for any particular controller. It just depends on the release of vSphere. And I also see that, you know, it's supported on vSAN 6.6. So some of this has kind of been there for a while. But where this brings a little extra value here is updates, as an example, right? So updates, notice here, and the only reason these are showing up like this is because they've already been downloaded. I haven't found an easy way to kind of reset this, but if I notice here, it says management tool for the H730 Mini. It shows me these two hosts do not have that tool loaded, okay? And then also for one host, we have to know what the firmware is. We see that this host, it doesn't have the correct firmware, right? So I can go to this particular tool and I can say, all right, let's download or let's use a rolling update of installing these VIBs to these two hosts, right? And I'll end up coming back, but if I look at my recent tasks, I'll go and I'll see that I'm in the process of installing those up to host 8 and host 6. So when I come back in a minute, I'll go and I'll see that these guys have, you know, the right have the tools and whatnot. And I'll get back to that in just a sec, right? Or Actually, it may have already done it. Yeah, I'll come back to that in just a second. So another thing I want to talk about specifically to what we've added to vSAN 6.6 while that is updating is take a look here, and I'll notice that I've got, these are the hosts that do have some disk groups added. If I look at host number 3, this particular disk group, and I decide, I want to bring this disk group offline because I'm either doing maintenance or I'm, let's say I'm expanding it or some whatever reason. Let's say I'm swapping from 400 gig drives or some larger drives, that type of thing. Well, if I click this new little, I'll call it decommissioning button, right? What if I click that, depending on what I choose as a potential mechanism, whether it's to evacuate or ensure data accessibility or no data evacuation, I will see what I might affect, right? So before, with previous builds to 6.6, and to me this is kind of important when it comes to, day-to-day operations, right? Those day 2 things. Before I had to go and I had to figure out what is on what, right? What is where, how do I figure out what I'm going to affect, that type of thing. Swap objects, I've got a compliance status of unknown. Probably don't want to do this until everything listed here has a compliance status of compliant as opposed to non-compliant, that type of thing, right? So the important thing is that I don't have to do any work as far as trying to figure out beforehand where everything is, right? So we're exposing all of this. All right, the same thing happens if I'm going to put a host in maintenance mode. All right, so I got to put a host in maintenance mode. And if we notice, right, so same options, we got a little green check, we're good, or hey, you may have some, you may affect something here, right? If I click here under full results, same situation, it shows me that same pre-check. It shows me what's going to be affected, right? I have some swap objects that are kind of being problematic, but, right, so it gives me a better opportunity of seeing if I do this, what's it going to affect, right? Which is pretty good, all right? Let's go back and look at config assist and see if we have finished up with our installation of our tools, which it looks like we have. All right. I'll go and I'll do a retest. If I go and look at updates real quick, refresh, my VIB should go away. That was being a little problematic.
Hey, Jase, while you're refreshing, I've got a question that's come in from Graham.
Sure.
He says, I think it's referring to the VIBs, what you're just looking at. Do they do the standard Avago LSI parts, or is it only specifically branded ones?
Well, so for this particular host, and I'll go and I'll let me log back into host number 8, right? Because I actually had logged in earlier, really about 10 minutes before we started, and I was removing that particular VIB to make sure it didn't show up. But if I go and do a ESX CLI software VIB list grep perk for this particular controller that's H730, this happens to be the VMware ESX CLI or ESX perk CLI 1.05.08, right? Just this particular one. Now, the important part of this to consider and to keep in mind is if you look under health and performance specifically, right? This is where we go in, we get the the latest version online, and we go and we pull, or we can download that JSON file, right? For environments that are offline, okay? This HCL database is going to have this particular information in it. It's going to say this is the particular management tool that you need, and it's also going to say this is the firmware that you need, okay? Now, if you do have an offline environment, when you click on this, I happen to have already have them downloaded, right? But if you did not have them downloaded, it would actually pop up in this space right here, a URL, and it would tell you where you could go to get it. And then you can manually load it in here, right? So it's all tied to the HCL. I would say other LSI 3108 based controllers that happen to be supported are probably going to use Store CLI as opposed to Perk CLI, okay? I don't know if that answers the question specifically, but it's really more of aligns with whatever the vendor tells us is the appropriate set of tools to go with that particular controller. Now I can come, like I said before, I can come over here to updates and go to, notice this guy. So the version I've got is 25.4 on host 6 and 25.3 on host 8. I can at this point go and say, all right, well, I need to do an in-place rolling update. I can do one by one, or I can do them all at one time. I can't do all of them at one time in this particular situation. But the important thing is I can patch this firmware, right? So a question came in the other day, and it's like, well, why is this valuable? Well, I look at it from a perspective of what if I have a cluster that has a combination of servers with a combination of controller types. Let's say I've got some of one maker, some of another maker, and those aren't necessarily updated in the same fashion. This gives me a single location UI-wise to be able to update everything, right? As opposed to, let's say I've got a combination of Dell servers, and I've got a combination of, let's say, Lenovo or Supermicro servers, and I'm not familiar with the firmware updating process on Supermicros just because I haven't used them in quite a while. But I'm sure the update mechanism is a bit different than going through, let's say, an iDRAC with a Dell, right? So this kind of gives us a central location to be able to accommodate all of that, right? So in one spot, which is really pretty cool. We could. There are a lot of different ways you could do it. You could choose to update just a few. You could choose to update them all. Whatever. It's really kind of your choice, right? Now we'll also say that if you, and I found this out over the course of the past couple of days, this is my VCSA that I'm running, but this cluster was 6.2, or actually the host 5 through 8 were 6.2. I was running 6.2 patch 4, so before update 3, all being managed by this same cluster or the same vCenter, right? Now the interesting part there that I found is that, and I can't attest to 6.0 update 3. I'm just not familiar. I haven't tested that yet, but I noticed that the health check, under monitor here, worked perfectly fine with 6.2. Config assist didn't work, obviously, because we don't support that, right? But that was a good little thing that I found, right? So here I'm seeing the same exact thing. I've got these same two hosts that their firmware is not, not updated. But notice here I can say update software, right? And it brings me back to the same spot. Use a rolling update. I think this presents the same thing, right? All right, I'm not going to update those right now per se. Now, something else I'll mention that we did add, if we go to general here. Okay, if you notice, I do have deduplication compression disabled, and I've got encryption disabled, but also notice that I've got unicast as my networking mode. Right, before, with every version of vSAN previous to 6.6, and even in an environment where I've got 6.6 and 6.5 mixed, I will have multicast. But when all members of the cluster are upgraded to 6.6, the transport mechanism goes from being unicast to multicast, or multicast to unicast. Okay, so that's a lot of people have asked for that. Now I want to cover encryption, but I want to show you guys something a little bit different first. Okay, and this is something I meant to get set up, but I haven't had the opportunity yet. But what I want to do is I want to go into administration, and I want to go and I want to.
Just before you dive into that, we have some questions.
Sure, go right ahead.
Ask us if for the cards, do they do standard Avago LSI parts or only specifically branded ones like Dell or IBM? He says that it sounds that it's very vendor specific.
It is very vendor specific, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, with that being said, a good example there, right? So today we're not supporting Cisco, right? As far as that goes, Cisco typically is going to update a lot of their gear through UCSM, right? UCS Manager. We're probably going to have to accommodate an offload mechanism to then invoke UCSM to be able to accommodate updates on Cisco, right? Which that's part of the framework, and I don't have all the details on the framework specifically, but that's part of the framework is to be able to support that. On the other hand, if you look at, let's say, HPE as an example, and this is not me bad-mouthing HPE by any means, but HPE obviously right now has a requirement where you have to have active support to be able to download updates. So we don't have that yet, and then when we do have support with HPE to be able to do this, when that time comes, if that time comes, I would imagine it's probably going to be a two-part process where you either just get a list of where the right pieces are as far as the firmware and the VIBs, the tools, or it could be handing off authentication where you have to sign in with your your particular HP account, right? That type of thing. That part I'm not certain about, but I do know today, and we've got a list. I think we publicly shared it out there on Virtual Blocks. It should be ending up on Storage Hub very soon of the specific vendors as well as the specific controllers. So it's not all of them, unfortunately. I will say, as far as the Dell H730 goes, with some of the issues that we had back in the 6.1 and 6.2 days, when 6.1 was pretty much there for from 6.1 to 6.2 was there for everybody but the H730s, and then we had to do a little bit of additional validation there, going from 6.1 to 6.2. We did a lot of additional additional validation specific to the H730s, right? And part of that, I would say, has kind of helped us with some of this. When 6.5 was released, we didn't immediately support HPE. Now HPE is supported as well. So again, vendor by vendor, card by card, it really all depends on the validation and testing process, if it's easy to accomplish those types of things, right? This is something that we've been working on for quite a while. We had actually hoped to bring some of it last year, and it just really wasn't ready, both from a mechanically as well as a agreement perspective. But now with 6.6, we've got several vendors that are participating in it. It's a bit more robust than it was about a year ago as far as using internal code, and I think it's an opportunity to make things a lot easier as far as day 2 operations go.
Awesome, thank you. So just remember to check the ATL, whichever card you're thinking of getting, and make sure the versions and everything lines up.
Correct. All right, now what I'm doing right now is I'm creating a just a little account called no crypto. Okay. Now I'm very rusty here on setting up my group, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably fudge through this, but give me one sec. If you'll notice that we've got a new group, or actually it's a new role. I forget where it is. Bear with me one second. Roles. I'm sorry, it's in roles. Okay. So notice we have a no crypto administrator role now. Okay. And whoops, I don't do this much, and you have to bear with me, right? But if I go to this user that I just made, come on, demo gods, let me make this happen. All right. No, this is not where I got to do it. Bear with me one second. That's not roles, permissions. Here we go, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to grab this no crypto admin, right? And then I want to add this user no crypto that I just made, right? Now this is very important when it comes to kind of our security profile, if you will, right? Notice here, cryptographic operations are not allowed with this particular role, okay? Now I'm going to open up a completely different browser. I've got it ready and waiting on me. CRYPTO add. Let's see. I think that's it. So the no crypto admin role was introduced in 6.5, and the reason it was added was for the capability of using VM encryption. Right, and what I mean by VM encryption is the feature that's included as part of Enterprise Plus, where we can encrypt VMs. Now, I have all the other capabilities that any other administrator would have, but I do not have the capability of enabling encryption. All right, so we did announce vSAN encryption in 6.6. It does require an enterprise license. if I look at this particular cluster and I go to configure, and I go to vSAN, give me 1 second. Okay, notice encryption is disabled. Notice here I have no option to enable or disable encryption whatsoever, right? If I come back to this guy, and I'm logged in as administrator, if you notice right up here, right? I go and look at that cluster. Once it populates, and I go to general. Come on. Demo gods be nice.
We're doing rain dances for
Notice
you on
now I have
Twitter here.
encryption. So I happen to have a KMS server already configured, right? I'm going to enable encryption here, and then it goes through the process of reconfiguring the cluster. It's going to take disk groups offline, right? Because I'm going to go through and I'm going to take that host key, or that client encryption key, or key encryption key, KEK, and I'm going to take that in conjunction with a disk encryption key, and I'm going to encrypt each and every one of the individual vSAN disks. Now, it's important to keep in mind we work a little bit different than, and notice we're changing our disk format from 3 to 5 in this particular cluster. I think there were 3 previously. And of course, it's giving me a little bark here because they're not 5.0 yet, but we'll come back and take a look at that in a second. Okay, it's enabled. That's strange. Anyway, make sure it doesn't have any particular errors. Let's go and make sure it did encrypt everything right. It's griping about my vMotion. That's fine, because those weren't good keys, or good IPs rather. All right. See what it's saying here. It's probably going to tell me that these aren't really encrypted properly, right? The disk group is encrypted, but encryption is not enabled on the cluster. Okay, so I'll remediate, and it'll go in through. It'll add encryption. Okay, but where I'm getting at this is if we look in this environment, I can take that away. So our CISSO folks who are always worried about security and that type of thing, which they should be, right? We now have the capability of taking those encryption keys, if you will, the ability to encrypt or decrypt away from administrators if we want to, right? As far as that goes. Okay, and this will take a little bit because we have to roll through each of the disks and handle the encryption process. Now, I'll also say specifically when it comes to, and I make sure I'm logged in as the right one, right? Or let me back up, right? So I can come here and I can say generate new encryption keys. This is what we would call a shallow rekey. Right? Shallow rekey doesn't really, it doesn't require disk groups to be taken offline or any of that kind of stuff. It just basically refreshes the key encryption key. But I can say re-encrypt all the data. In cases such as that, that's actually going to do what we call a deep re-encryption, if you will, or deep rekey. That's going to evacuate all the disk groups and completely rekey each of the disks. Now you can, if you'd like, you don't have to necessarily do it through the UI. Let's say you're managing 15, 20, 100 vSAN clusters. Let's say you've got you work for a retailer and you've got vSAN encryption across let's say 50, 100 sites, things like that. I did put together something that you can use to make things a little bit easier. It's code.vmware.com/samples. You do have to have the 6.5.1 Power CLI tools, right? But I've got a little code here that you can very easily run this particular commandlet. And yes, Kyle, before you get on to me, I want to roll this stuff into the encryption modules, if you will. I just got to sit down and have an opportunity to do that. But hopefully that'll be there at some point. Anyway, so here I'm saying, vSAN encryption rekey, the vCenter, I want to point to the name of the cluster? Do I want to do a shallow or deep rekey? And do I want to enable reduced redundancy, where I have a situation where, let's say, I have 3 nodes, or run into a situation where I have just enough nodes to meet my FTT and FTM requirements, right? So it's a pretty simple script. I wrote it in about half an hour. It didn't take a lot of work, but I do want to definitely bring to light the fact that I'm using the new get vSAN view commandlet, right? So I'm using this get vSAN view commandlet, and then I'm going and I'm checking to see, is encryption enabled on that vSAN cluster? If vSAN is enabled here, and if it is encrypted here, then in this particular case, let's go ahead and start doing a rekey. All right, so here I'm just saying, hey, I'm doing a rekey, and then right behind it, I say, execute this rekey. Do I want it to be shallow or deep? And do I want to allow reduced redundancy? This is one of those quick, easy ways of being able to accommodate this at scale if you'd like, right? So what I'm kind of trying to demonstrate here is the fact not only do we have encryption, but from an API perspective, if you've got a very, very large environment and you want to encrypt, whether it be a re-encrypt, shallow or deep or whatnot at scale, it's very easy to do. Now, I will mention before, without going in deep into any one of these environments specifically, I'll mention that some others in this particular space, whether it be traditional arrays or other hyperconverged players, things like that, will a lot of times use self-encrypting drives to accommodate the encryption process, specifically of data on those drives. And I would mention that vSAN encryption as well as VM encryption both encrypt the VM itself. They're not encrypting the drives themselves as far as that goes on the back end, as far as a hardware key or anything specific to that. But vSAN encryption is for the entire data store. VM encryption is for an individual VM. But more importantly, self-encrypting drives are not required at all. VM encryption works on any data store. vSAN encryption works on any vSAN data store. Doesn't matter as far as the drives go. You don't have to have any special kind of drives. They don't have to be validated as said, self-encrypting drives or anything like that, right? It's not necessary. I would also, challenge anyone as far as looking at kind of the mechanism of the encryption process as far as where it provides value in the security of data. And what I mean by that is self-encrypting drives really protect you if someone walks out of the data center with a drive, okay? If I'm walking out of the data center with a drive and I've got, let's say RAID on that drive and other things, then there's some additional work I've got to do to, even if they weren't encrypted, to be able to get that data. But if I walk up to a, let's say I'm a contractor and I log in with administrative access and I'm one of these rogue, people that likes to pull data down and archive it and hold it, for a later time when I want to use it, for my own benefit, that type of thing. I can very easily go into the data store, right? And I don't have anything on this particular data store, but I can browse the data store and I can download a VM, download a VMDK. Let me go and look at actually where there is one, right? On vSAN data store 1. I can download a VM to a USB drive. If I'm using self-encrypting drives, then I still have full access, right? Because I'm only encrypting the drive itself. I'm not necessarily encrypting the data, right? So I can go and I can download this guy and I can go have fun with it to my heart's content. vSAN encryption and VM encryption, both of those actually encrypt the object itself, okay? So that's kind of a way to differentiate the two. Self-encrypting drives protect the drives. We actually protect the data on the drives as opposed to the drives themselves. So if I go and try to download this VMDK and it's encrypted, I'm not going to be able to get anything out of it without the keys. All right, so just one little differentiation as far as those go. Now I'll also mention some other things that that we're doing a little bit better specific to 6.6. There was always the challenge in the past that if you had a vSAN cluster and you lost your vCenter, what do I do next? What happens when I need to look at the health of that vSAN cluster? What if the health of that vSAN cluster, either a network partition or other, is the reason you can't get into your vCenter to be able to look at that same vSAN, right? So it's kind of a catch-22. So I'm looking at host number 4 here, right? So it's, give me one sec, let this guy populate. So this is 050104, 050104, right? So this is the host I'm looking at. Notice here under data stores, this is not new, vSAN data store, but when I click that guy, I now see an opportunity to monitor. And for some reason in my browser, events always seems to go slow, so I'll go ahead and zip over to vSAN. But notice here, I see for vSAN, my claiming mode is manual, which by the way, we no longer have an auto as of 6.6. I don't have deduplication or encryption enabled, or even iSCSI for this particular cluster. Remember, I enabled encryption for the lower cluster. I can also see which hosts are participating in that vSAN cluster, right? So now they're in order, okay. I'm not sure why it's showing a couple of them more than once. That's new, maybe a bug. Notice I can look at, let's say, whether it be my network, right? I'm trying to move this down to give it a little bit more space. No, it's not wanting to. I can look at partition. Yeah.
We have a question. So Graham asks, you know, what kind of CPU hit can we expect out of encryption?
I would say the numbers that I've seen have been somewhere between 2 and 3%. And we try to be conservative with those numbers. And what I mean by conservative, we probably try to tell you it's going to take more than we think. So I would say 2 to 3% additional. And the reason being that it's not really significant is because we use AES-NI offload on the Intel processors, right? We even have a health check piece that will warn you, hey, look, I've got AES-NI disabled on this host, and as a result, I'm probably going to take a performance hit, but we offload that to that particular instruction set within the CPUs. Now, fortunately, that AES-NI has been around since, I want to say 2008, 2009 time frame, if I recall correctly, right? So it's not really a significant hit.
Very smart, thank you.
That being said, also, as far as the encryption process goes, and let me go and look at one of these hosts here under disk management. If I look at one of these disk groups, and give me just a sec for it to populate them. This disk group here, notice this is just, again, this is nested. I've got a flash device and a capacity device here, but we encrypt at the cache tier. And then when we go to write to the capacity tier, we de-encrypt, or decrypt rather. We decrypt. Then we do whatever work we need to do to that particular data. And when I say do whatever we need to do, deduplication and compression, checksumming, those types of things. And then once all of that is done, the very last thing that we do is we do encryption again, right? So we re-encrypt at that point. And where this is valuable is specifically when it comes to consolidation ratios, right? So if I look at my vSAN data store pre-encryption, and I have let's say a 2x consolidation ratio, or I have a 4x consolidation ratio, whatever. When I enable vSAN encryption, I'm going to have the same, right? Whereas with VM encryption or with some other encryption strategies, let's say you're using a third party, let's say high trust encryption or Talus or Gemalto or whoever, where they're doing in-guest encryption, those don't really necessarily align well when it comes to consolidation savings from deduplication and compression. But because we do that very, very last, we don't take any hit as far as the capacity consolidation ratio goes. So that's just another thing to kind of keep in mind when it comes to which type of encryption is right for my particular use case, right? I'm not saying one's better than the other. It may be more important that I have from an encryption perspective. It may be more important for me to to have a multi-tenancy type approach. Let's say I'm a hosting provider, as an example, or let's say I've got different departments that need different KMS clusters. With VM encryption, I can apply different policies with different key management servers. I can very easily do multi-tenancy from an encryption perspective. vSAN encryption is one key or one set of keys, if you will, for the entire vSAN cluster. Right, so we're not really necessarily aligned with multi-tenancy, if you will, from a vSAN perspective, unless it's separate, for separate clusters. VM encryption it's better suited for that. So it's again one of those things that at VMware we're just really happy to be able to provide choice, to customers. Who knows? We may see multi-tenancy as an option with vSAN encryption at one point. That's just not how it works today. Okay. All right. So let's kind of get back to the host UI, the host client. I can go through and I can get visibility into pretty much the whole cluster, right? All from within the UI here. Right, what's my current situation? What happens if I have an additional failure? Where am I as far as my host component counts? That type of thing, right? I'm not sure why these guys are saying 3,000, but at the same time, if you happen to be one of those folks that are fine with enabling SSH to a host, which I'm personally not, but this is obviously a lab environment, I can now also run ESX CLI commands and say vSAN. I can say health. And of the cluster, I think it's get. Maybe it's list. I'm sorry. Right. Give me a list of all the tests that you've run for the cluster and tell me whether they're green or yellow or red. And if I scroll up a bit, I can now see overall health and so on. Right. At the same time, and rather than using a list, I can use a get-t being my test name, and I can say, let's say, component limit health. Right, run a specific test, and it gives me more detail specific to that test. All right, so again, additional capabilities as far as not having vCenter available, not necessarily having to go into the RVC, the Ruby vSphere console, that type of thing. Now, if I kind of back up this ESX CLI command and I just type in vSAN by itself, I'll notice a new one that I actually have used a bit, debug. All right, it's a really good one. Let's say I want to do debug for a particular object, right? I can go and I can get granular, and rather than having to either use the RVC, and I don't know all these by hand or by memory per se, but I can go into each one of these and do a lot of looking around again without having to have RVC, which requires vCenter, and get more visibility. I ran into a situation not too long ago when I was still running, I was running GA code, but it was before we GA'd, and I had a couple of inaccessible objects that I had lost through, I forget what I had done. I was doing a little tinkering around trying to see what I could get away with. And I ended up with a couple inaccessible objects. I found these objects and then got the UID for these objects and actually went and removed them from the command line without ever having to have the RVC available to me. Now going further, and I don't do this much, right? But I can, if it will, there we go. I can also run these commands using the vSphere CLI, whether I'm doing it from a Linux box or I'm doing it from a, from a Linux box or doing it from a Windows box, right? So all these same pieces are available to me, right? So I can say, vSAN health or vSAN cluster health list. Of course, I have the syntax backwards, right? So vSAN health cluster get list. That's what I want, right? So I don't necessarily have to enable SSH. I can do all of this from a Windows or a Linux command line securely. I can also tie that into I can tie that into bash scripts. I can tie them into cron jobs, whatever, right? However I want to automate. Important part I'm getting at is the fact that I can actually go and programmatically enumerate and be able to remediate whatnot without necessarily having vCenter available.
Jase,
right?
I had not
Now
seen
if I go in
this.
again,
This is awesome.
It is. Well, in the debug where I can get in and kind of look at stuff individually and not having to, not having to fool with the RVC and it's great. And I haven't even talked about, like some performance graphs, right? I mean, something else we've added. Now, I don't do a whole lot of work on this cluster, but something else that's really important specifically to let's say we go and look at monitoring, right? And I need to be on the right cluster. Come on, refresh. There we go. Okay. if I look under performance, previously, we would see things specific to the cluster, we would see things specific to the host. But if we look at performance here now, I now have not only VM consumption, vSAN backend, disk group, and disk, but I can now look at individual physical adapters and see what their performance is like specific to vSAN, right? I currently just have one on this particular, assigned, right? I can look at the VM kernel adapter, and then also if I've got an aggregation of those, I can drill down specifically to each one of these. I don't have iSCSI enabled, but we're also exposing all of the metrics for iSCSI as far as initiators and so on, right? So we're exposing even more than we ever have. All of this is available via API as well. I wish I didn't have an opportunity to get it installed, but we've got a new management pack for vRealize operations that goes very, very in depth and provides all of this in a nice kind of tied in a bow type dashboard, right? So the biggest. Go ahead.
Ken Malbon asks,
you're about to say?
He has a great question. Is there anything that we can only do with RVC anymore?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I haven't tried a feature parity of 6.6 with all the tools available and RVC. I haven't really tried that yet. I just haven't had the opportunity. We've had so much going on. I'm still behind on an encryption paper as well as a config assist paper, right? As far as that goes.
Yeah, but if you don't have anything right off the top of your head, that's a pretty good chance.
Well, if you think about like RVC is really good. A good example. RVC lets you run the vSAN observer, as an example. In vSAN observer, it may be easier to see, let's say, any particular performance across VM kernel interfaces across all nodes and that type of thing, right? Whereas here we're essentially within this UI, we have to look individually at those. Whereas in vSAN observer, we don't necessarily. I mean, it's less of a, it's kind of an overall picture, if you will. But you tie this to vRealize operations as an example, and you can have an aggregated view very, very easy, right? So I'd say RVC was really probably never intended to be customer facing, if you will, and it just kind of got to the point where it became convenient. I'm not saying that the RVC is going away per se, but I don't think there's necessarily going to be any dedicated advancement of it, if you will. So there may be times where it's required, maybe times where it's not. I don't know if it's going to be here, forever as far as that goes. Now, I'll also say that kind of some of the things that were exposed in vSAN Observer, if I go back to configure and look at the performance service itself, if I look at under health and performance, and I look at the performance service, we'll see another little opportunity to get some more data. And we really say this is, quote, recommended for opportunities with GSS support, type conversations, right? Because it's going to use additional CPU and IO, right? But we now have a verbose mode for the performance service, so we can get even more granular reporting specific to vSAN. You can, again, turn this on, turn this off, that type of thing, right? And highly recommend this only to be used when directed by GSS, but most of the big things, and we don't expose this a lot, right? But I'll go and I'll share it here, right? So if I do a find -name obj tool, right? Do it like that. So I've had situations where I've needed to remove inaccessible objects before, and you typically are going to run this particular command, obj tool, and then you're going to pass the object U or component UUID and that type of thing, or object UUID and that type of thing. The last time I had this particular situation, I simply used where is it? I basically used ESXCLI vSAN debug and then got my object UUID, and then I went and plugged it into the OBJ tool and then deleted the object. Right, but I can go in, I can look at things like the policy of an object and all that other kind of stuff without having to be in the RVC, right? And at the same time, because again, all of this, and of course you can't see it, but all of this right here is exposed here. And at the same time, and Kyle, I'm sorry for not spinning it up, right? But this is all exposed as well in Power CLI 6.5.1. Maybe a little, problematic. You may need some advanced code and that type of thing, kind of like I did with my example, right here, where you have to go and look at, the particular managed object and find out which particular pieces you have to look for, right? As far as this particular method, if you will. But where I'm getting at with that is all of this stuff is available now in one form or fashion, and because we're exposing it at an API level, you can do a lot more and a lot greater things specific to it, right? I will say William Lamb presented something not too long ago where he was actually grabbing smart data, and I'll say that was a bit of beta code, but important thing is it is still exposed, the smart data from those drives. We've just got to find a proper way of presenting that, right? And that's something that we're kind of working through. But point is, with 6.2 and above, the API changed for the better, and that's one of the reasons why newer versions of 6.5 and 6.6 can still manage 6.2 as far as the health check and whatnot, right? Can't do config assist, can't do the updates, those kind of things. Those require the updated code, but that's why we don't have any backward compatibility issues. Now, something I do want to share, I know we're right at time, but I want to make sure that I share it, right? If we go to Storage Hub, and this is kind of what I'm talking about my my little Easter egg thing, right? If you go to Storage Hub, you look under vSAN, look under Learn and Evaluate, and you should see the very first one, vSAN demonstrations. Okay, I put together a video of I'm sorry, that's not the right one. Config assist and easy install. Maybe that's it. It should say long. Here we go. Easy install and config assist, right? Long. This is actually just a subset of that one. But if you look at this one, easy install and config assist demo, long, right? It's about 35 minutes. Anything that took a long amount of time as far as deploying or updating firmware and whatnot, and is using 4 of the same hosts that were in this cluster. There's an error in part of my config, okay? I'm not going to say what it is. I'm not going to say where it is. I'm not going to say what it pertains to, and I'm not going to say it pertains to vSAN. But if you watch the video and you figure out where the error is, that will prove that part of this absolutely does not work. If you can find that, and you can send me a DM, my Twitter account, just Jase McCarty, and I'll get to them as they come in based on availability that I have and whatnot, right? But the first, I'll say 3 people that DM me and say, here's where the error is, and here's why it's an error. The first 3 people that do that, and again, I have to keep it to US based because of tariffs or taxes and VAT and that type of stuff, right? The first 3 people that can identify the error with the video, I'll send some kind of vSAN swag to them. Okay, so that's kind of my challenge. All right, I didn't realize it until after.
Right now.
I didn't realize it until after I had made the video. It's like, oh wait, I have an error right there, and I'll be honest, and I kind of re-recorded a very small part and kind of inserted that, and then I realized I was like, oh wait a minute, I didn't realize I didn't update that piece. So that's the challenge, and I'm sure I'm going to get inundated with DMs, and as they come in, I'm going to look at them, and the first 3 people, what I'll do is the first 3 people that correctly identify where the error is and what the error pertains to, I'll see about sending some vSAN swag to them. Okay.
You got it.
I probably shouldn't be doing this. But the thing is, you got to watch the whole video though to find out exactly where it is. So, all right. And I talked about doing this last week with a couple of people internal, but I wanted to save the opportunity for for anybody who might be paying attention tonight.
I think you had a packed house of people paying attention. So that was a great show. Great job.
Good, good. Well, I hope everybody got a little bit out of it. I'm just tickled to death with vSAN, especially 6.6. I couldn't ask for a better team to work with. All the TM guys, John Nicholson, Pete Fletcher doing the Virtually Speaking podcast, Pete Keeler, Jeff Hunter, GS Calsa, got a great boss, Ken Warrenberg. Our engineering folks are absolutely awesome. Our leadership and PM folks are top notch, and I couldn't be happier. I really couldn't be happier.
All right, well, guys, any other questions? I'll happily open up microphones. Just let me go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
See if anybody wants to. And of course, if you don't want to ask a question, please mute yourself, but we're just trying to get some conversation and taking advantage of having Jase here.
Hey, Jase, I do have a question. It's more of a vSAN 101, I guess, but what would the overhead be to host performance for vSAN? Like what would I expect that to be?
So it really depends, right? And what I mean by that is depending on what we're leveraging as far as a feature set goes. If we're leveraging, let's say, for instance, if I look at this app one, this particular VM should have a policy of erasure coding, right? So, and this is an all-flash environment. I've got erasure coding here with Stripe with the 2. Important thing to keep in mind here is vSAN itself natively is going to be between about 2 and 10% CPU overhead. Okay, now that's a kind of a conservative number. I know it's a wide range. I'll say in many cases we see as low as 2 and maybe no higher than 4, right, for just a basic vSAN operation. Add erasure coding, deduplication and compression, as well as checksumming to that mix, which we actually also improved checksumming in 6.6. I'll say you'll probably see between 2 and 4% additional CPU overhead, right? So if I do a very, very low end, if you will, let's say I'm doing 2 normal and then I'm doing 2 with erasure coding, deduplication and compression, then I'm running about 4% CPU. Now that's not to say that I may not see 10 and then also see 4 and run about 4% CPU overhead, right? Add encryption on top of that. It's probably about 2% CPU overhead, just because, again, we're offloading that to AES and I. It could be less, right? You take all those pieces into account. I don't like to necessarily say that it's again a case by case basis, but we see pretty much a good bit lower than that as far as that goes. Now, memory utilization is going to be really dependent specifically on the number of the type of the size of cache devices that you have, as well as how many disk groups that you have, right? That type of thing. So if I have 2 disk groups, I'm going to have more memory utilization than if I just had 1. If I had 3, I'm going to have more than I had 2, and that type of thing. And we've got some, there's a KB article that you can Google, just vSAN memory utilization, and it'll basically spell out specifically what your memory utilization per host is as far as that goes, right? Trying to think what else as far as a good rule of thumb. In conjunction with that, if I'm doing X amount of CPU overhead, let's say I was talking about 10 to 14%, something like that. I personally wouldn't recommend anything less than like a 10 or 12 core processor. Of course, we've got 22, 24 core processors out there now. I wouldn't recommend anything less than a 10 or 12 core processor as far as that goes. Now, you can run vSAN with a single proc. Absolutely. I've had people say, hey, I want to buy a vSAN ready node. It comes with 2 procs, but for licensing reasons, I think I can be fine if I just go with 1 proc. Can I yank a proc and only pay for 1 vSAN CPU license? Absolutely, you can. Whether or not it's right for your particular use case, that's entirely dependent on your use case, right? But we can do that as well. So, as far as overhead goes, 10 to 14, 15%, somewhere in there, and use those multi-core CPUs. And again, you can go down to 1 if necessary. And that's one of the great things about vSAN is the fact that not only can we scale up, we can scale down. Right, so it's pretty flexible. It's like Lego bricks. You can do pretty much anything and everything with it in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, and one of the things with software-defined storage is it really depends on the hardware too. So the more features you want, the better your hardware should be. I do have one question, Jace. This is a personal question for my own home lab.
Okay.
What happens if we mixed hybrid and all flash in the same cluster? Is that even possible? Is it?
You
I don't
could
think you
you
can.
could do it. You can physically do it, but it's not a supported config. Now, I will say that Duncan Epping on yellowbricks.com or yellow-bricks.com, he's got a particular blog post from about a year or more ago where he went through the process of migrating a cluster from being hybrid to being all flash. Okay, so you can, I'll say in a transitionary period, go from hybrid to all flash with a mixed config. But it's not supported as far as running hybrid and all flash simultaneously in a production state. At the same time, and this is something that we have since corrected, in 6.5, we introduced the fact that the vSAN standard licensing would now allow for all flash configuration. So basically, you can use all flash hardware with 6.5, but you don't get the additional data services, right? Because that comes with the advanced license. Or enterprise license as far as that goes. That has been rolled back to 6.2 as well. So if you've got 6.2 and you can't do that, you want to run all flash on a standard license with 6.2, you actually kind of have to check your keys in to get a 6.5 key, and then you check and then kind of do a key exchange and get some updated 6.2 keys, right? But I would highly recommend anyone that has all flash hardware and they are forcing it to behave as though it's hybrid, I would highly recommend that you kind of get the config right, as far as that goes. So if you have all flash hardware, please be sure to have it configured as all flash hardware, regardless of what license you're running.
That's a great tidbit. Thank you there, Jase.
I think we have one more comment that came in on Twitter from Ken. He said, Ken Nalbone, he said that he's surprised that you didn't say that vSAN is smarter than us.
Well, I'm not going to say vSAN is smarter than us, and if you really think about vSAN has got some really great things going for it in the way that I don't have to carve up LUNs. I don't have to. I remember when I was a storage guy. It was like there were two people who knew how to manage our fabric, right? Our fiber channel fabric. It was my boss and me, which meant I had to do all the work. And in that particular case, you touch fabric once every 3 to 6 months, and you hope you do it right. Otherwise, you've got a resume generating event, right? I think there are a lot of things that vSAN does that make things easier for us, and I'm a big believer in providing software and services that give us the capability of reducing our overall burden, And what I mean by that is I used to work 80 hours a week and I hated it, right? I want to be able to go to Little League and all that type of stuff, right? And I think vSAN's really good at that. Now, at the same time, I don't think that I can put together a lousy vSAN config and expect to get super awesome things out of it. I do have to have a little bit of proper decision making when it comes to the design and sizing of it, right? Like if I'm going all flash, I have to have shared 10 gig. I can't do 1 gig, and those types of things. And so within the boundaries of properly sizing and properly configuring vSAN, there are a lot of things that it does pretty well. And I'm not going to say it's any smarter than we are, but I think it promotes a smarter use of my time as a storage admin, if you will. You guys still there?
Well, the other reason for saying that vSAN is smarter than us is that would include you, and so that makes the statement invalid.
Well, I'm the dumbest guy in storage. I promise you that, right? But every now and then I have my moment, right? It's like, hey, well, we're talking about this. We need to take this into account. Oh yeah, that's right. We need to do that too, right? My big thing is, and I remember when 6.6 released, a couple people were like, hey, thanks Jase and Duncan and so on and so forth for such a great product. And my response was, I'm just the messenger. We've got all these awesome engineers that are putting together great stuff. They're the ones who work the magic. Customers are the ones obviously that consume it, but a lot of times, customers ask for things that we may or may not have thought of. Like 2-node direct connect is a direct result of a particular customer asking for that feature functionality. And it's taken off since we introduced that in 6.5 and kind of backported that to some builds of 6.2, right? So it's kind of collaborative, if you will. A lot of things, happen because customers want it to happen, and we do listen,
Oh yeah, That's the magic with VMware. We have great developers. We take feedback very seriously. If someone has a use case, we'll move heaven and earth.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
All right, Tom. I think we can let Jase go back to his wife.
Can I borrow him for one more second?
Sure.
Sure.
So my background is primarily in backup and recovery, and I've kind of been dragged into the VM world, here and there. One of the questions I had was, and unfortunately, I'll ask you to excuse me, I'm not very knowledgeable on vSAN. I get the basic concept of it, but if I'm dealing with the storage array, I have options where I can either use VADP to back up virtual machines directly from VMware, either using a direct connection to the storage array using like a iSCSI fiber channel or an NFS through the VM kernel. Is there any such option or API available to back up directly from the vSAN functionality so that I'm not having to traverse from vSAN through the hypervisor directly and then back out again? Or
so today, from a backup perspective, we do support VADP-based backups as it is in the grand scheme of things. Now, I'll say, we don't support SAN copy type backups through VADP, that type of thing. We do support hot add and that type of thing. But at the same time, something also to consider is a particular plug-in piece called VIO, right? So we do have some technology right now with VIO. I'll give an example, such as Recover Point for virtual machines, that kind of ties into the VIO stack and gives us the capability of really pulling it from the back end as opposed to going through, let's say, a VM kernel interface specifically, right? As far as doing those types of backups, right? A couple of different ways of doing it as far as that goes, and maybe we can get possibly Jeff Hunter or GS Kalsa on an upcoming vBrownBag to really go in depth. Oh, and Veeam actually also supports VIO now with their latest release, as far as offloading some of that mechanism as far as that goes.
Okay, because I'm using like solutions like Commvault, NetBackup, Avamar, those kinds of systems, and anywhere that I can kind of streamline the process is where I'm looking for. Right.
Yeah, I think we could probably do a whole vBrownBag, one evening just on backup and recovery and availability, specific to that. But we definitely, it's an important part of the overall solution.
Not it, Ariel, before you even throw me out there.
No, but Guru Simran Khalsa is part of vBrownBag, so we'll definitely reach out to him and tell him, hey, there's interest. Get on the schedule.
All right, is there anybody else, or are we going to let Jase get back to it?
I'll take one more.
Bueller,
going twice.
Sold.
All right.
Thank you very much, Jase. This has been amazing. It's been great information.
I'm glad. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and see you next week for another vBrownBag.
All right. Thanks, everybody.